Welcome to Fueled by the Sun, my 6-month carnivore experiment. In this experiment, I wanted to minimize my consumption of anti-nutrients, consume the most bioavailable and nutrient-dense food source, consume food that is optimal for regenerating humanity and our planet. So in the time that I did this experiment, I consumed a half a body of beef and 2 whole bodies of lamb. Now I sourced those from ethical farmers, and this is Dom. He's got a farm up at Dungog, and he has a regenerative farm that seeks to improve the pasture, improve the fertility of the land, and help us all by pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, rebuilding the soil, and allowing for the water to be held better in the soil so it drought-proofs the property, and also provides us with nutrient-dense food. Now these cows are amazing. They roam free on the pasture. They're managed in a rotational method, so that way they are part of the sanitation method as well as the sunlight harvesting productivity method that allows for that sunlight to be converted into the grasses and into their flesh, and also that energy to be transferred into the soil and to the microbiome of the soil, and allows for that biodiversity to allow for optimal health for not only the animals but also the humans consuming those animals, which is very cool. So I got the beef and I got it delivered to me in plastic tubs, and then after it got delivered to me, it was broken down. He cut it down on a bandsaw. I transferred it into my stainless steel containers, and these I kept in my freezer, my chest freezer, and then I took those out. They're about 2 to 3 kilos for each that I fit inside, and every 2 to 3 days I took one out. Now what I did is, on the first day I would have it raw, and people might be a bit freaked out by that, but I know the source and I know it's fresh, and I had frozen it as well before, and I would have, most of the time I'd have the organ meats raw or slightly seared, and I kept them in a separate container to the main cuts of meat. But here in this picture you can see I've got some brain there, some lamb brain, some liver, a fattier cut, and then some flesh. And I'd have that raw, slightly salted. Now every day I'd have 2 meals, 400 grams I'd have at lunch and dinner, nose to tail, so I would have around 75 to 100 grams of fat per meal, which was around 675 to 900 calories, and then I would have around 300 to 325 grams of meat or organs, marrow, connective tissue, which gave me around 75 grams of protein. So each day I was having around 2 to 2,500 calories. I'd have 2 tablespoons of salt, and each day I was having around 600 milligrams of magnesium glycinate. And I'd have 2 to 3 litres of filtered water, and I'd add that salt to it. So I didn't have any other supplements. I didn't eat anything else. That's all I ate for 6 months. So pretty simple, and it just gave me a good indication of, it gave me just this reassurance of what I am as a human being and what it means to be a human being, and our relationship to ruminant animals and how they sustained us and allowed us to evolve, as well as just a sense of security. So knowing that if I had a farm and I had an animal, had a cow, that could pretty much sustain me for almost 1 year, which is phenomenal when you think about food security and just a connection to your food supply. Now I would have the meat seared, so the first day I'd have it raw, or maybe just the first meal, and then I would sear the outside so it's fairly rare on the inside. The organ meats I always had raw and had them in a separate container, and just I'd slightly sear them sometimes. Then after that I'd cook it all the way through if it'd been out for a day or day and a half in the fridge, and any of the tougher cuts I'd slow cook so you get that nice soft collagen, and it allows for better use of all the tissue and better digestion, and it just tastes amazing. You can see that salty caramel lamb and beef is just amazing. And then all the bones I'd use to make bone broth, and I would do that. I'd have bone broth, I'd make it once a week from the bones, and I would have around 300 mils a day of that, and I'd use the collagen as well when I do all the slow cooked meats, I get that collagen that comes out of that, and I'd make that into a nice slice as well, which is really tasty. And I've since switched to using a pressure cooker to do my broths, simply because it allows for, or it's less histamines, because it allows for the collagen and the tougher cuts to break down a lot faster. There is some loss of nutrition, but in terms of the histamine response, if you're getting one of those, which I think I was, you're not getting as much nutrition anyway, so you're far better off getting the maximum out of it and reducing those histamines. So it just allows for me to do it a lot faster, rather than having a 24-hour broth or a 48-hour one, which was what I was doing. So I have a gym which I train people at the moment now. They're all away from the gym, but I'm training them online. And I've had that for 10 years. I've been in industry for 20 years, and I've coached people how to move. And a huge part of learning how to move better and improve your health is to eat better and to live a nice, simple, natural life and be connected to the food that you eat and taking the time to consume it well. So it's great fun, I love it, but I was very much limited by how well people eat. So it's such a big part of improving your adaptation to movement is to get the body healthy through nutrition and other lifestyle factors, but nutrition is massive. All the bones after I made the broth get returned to the soil, so I would collect them all, save them all up, and either compost them myself by burying them first and then putting them through the compost and crushing them, or on my farm trips, usually I try and get to a farm every 3 months, whether I go to Dom's farm or visit other farmers that I know. I take the bones with me to return to the soil, which is just part of that whole law of return, which none of us obey anymore because all our fecal matter goes out to the ocean, gets treated with chemicals, and we just take from the earth, mine from the earth, and then bury it in landfill and all of those things. But this is one small step of me trying to make a difference and just inspire others to think about that and to do something. For 20 years I've followed a Western A Price diet. It's how I met Dr. Ron Ehrlich was when he brought Sally Fallon out, I think 15 years ago. And I went along and watched Sally Fallon talk, who is from the Western A Price Foundation. Now, he's an amazing dentist, travelled the world in the 1920s and 30s. And what I found really interesting is that obviously all the people that he studied were all eating animal protein and flesh and fat and some form of animal product. But they had all different types of plants in their diet. They all had all these amazing methods of preparing plants to make them more digestible and be able to get the nutrition from them. And it's quite an interesting concept when you think of the culinary arts and how we convert plants into something that's digestible. And there's a lot that goes into that. And if you look at our history and you look at the megafauna and the fact that we wiped them out, and there's a lot of theories and ideas about how once we got to the point where we wiped them out, then we were having to rely on the plants in that environment, and we formed civilizations. So then we had to figure out, how do we make these plants more digestible? And that was something that I found quite amazing about his work, and looking at all the different methods for all the different plant types to make them, to neutralize the anti-nutrients and make them digestible. So you've got so many different anti-nutrients in plants. So lectins are one of them that aggravate the gut lining and cause that intestinal epithelial layer to get inflamed, the tight gap junctions to open up and cause a release of zonulin. Saponins are another one, which are like a preservative to the plant, but also cause gastrointestinal inflammation, and they're in legumes. Phytic acid, another one, which traditional cultures would soak, sprout, ferment, do all different methods just to try and make these things less hazardous. And when you think about that, you think, well, if meat is completely bioavailable and all the fat, then why would we do that? Well, obviously it was because we had a lack of meat and that we were forced to do it. Seems very logical. Histamines as well, which are in sauerkraut. Sauerkraut was one of the things that I was going to keep in this experiment because it's so high in so many nutrients as well as vitamin C. Although when reading up about histamines and just kind of looking at it and thinking, well, I want to do this well, and I really want to know for myself, can I be without them? And that brought up the whole kind of vitamin C thing as well, which was quite interesting. The other histamine forming food is obviously whenever you have leftovers, it doesn't matter what it is, it's going to have histamines and they'll start forming. So in broth or slow cooked meats, if you're not having it straight away, hence why I've switched to using the pressure cooker instead of the slow cooker, even though the slow cooker has a much nicer flavour and that caramelization. It's a slower process, which it does preserve a lot of the other nutrients, but if you're having a histamine response, then that's a waste anyway. So I'm exploring that and trying to understand that for the people that I work with, because it is a very common problem for many people, especially once the gut lining isn't optimal. Histamines are also in all the squashes, pumpkins, in the seeds, in the skin. So you do have to de-seed these and skin them if you do want to eat them. Oxalates are another major issue, which a lot of the superfoods have them in it. So people talk about, the kale, the spinach, cacao, all of these things, but they're tiny crystals, and most of us have heard of calcium stones, or people having urinary problems because of that. But when you have oxalates and these crystals, these tiny crystals, they can get into the joints, get into all the tissues of the body, and they cause a lot of discomfort. And I figured that out for myself when I was doing this experiment, because at the beginning, first couple of months, by not having them at all, I actually got worse pain, and then I was reading up on it. There was a detoxing process, and then after that I found that I was more sensitive to them, and I could feel them more if I tried them. And I've been experimenting for the last 4-5 months now. I've been trying to implement different foods to test them after having 8 months completely off. So cacao is another one, and I was having lots of cacao because I love my raw cacao desserts with coconut oil, and I used to have grated turmeric in them as well, and all of these things that everyone thinks are so healthy, and I was having them every day. And this is where rotational diets and where the need for diversity in consuming plants is really important. I did 8 months and all I ate was the beef and a lamb, and I just ate that and nothing else. So the same thing every day. Whereas with plants, what I believe is why we've developed all these rotational methods is because your body can tolerate a certain amount, but if you're having one thing all the time, it can damage you. So I was having cacao desserts pretty much every day, as my treat after lunch. I never had it at dinner because I found it too stimulating. But part of that stimulation is not just, the boost in energy, but that's actually a stress response to it as well, which is quite interesting. Oxalates in turmeric. Now, curcumin is one of the superfoods everyone raves about for its anti-inflammatory properties and all these other benefits, and yet it's loaded with oxalates. And I found for myself, I was having fresh turmeric every day, putting it in all my cooking, and I found a benefit for my inflammation, but I was loading up my body on oxalates, and I think that contributed long term to the problem that I developed from having all these superfoods. There's oxalates and salicylates in berries as well, so if you're consuming lots of these, and again it comes back to diversity and looking at not consuming too much of these things because of the tolerable amount. So that's why I think, getting that, people always say, oh, you've got to get all the colour of the rainbow and get that diversity, and I think that's definitely true for plants. Whereas when you're having meat, it's just red and cooked, and it's fine, raw or cooked in the way that you like it, and you can do it every day, which is fascinating to me. I've always had a problem with nightshades, especially eggplant. So for as long as I can remember, every time I had eggplant, my tongue would swell up, the back of my throat would swell up, and I would feel that. So I knew to avoid eggplant. But all the nightshades have solanines and lectins within them. They're anti-nutrients, the alkaloids, cause inflammation for a lot of people. So I found, obviously I took out everything, but I don't have those, and I haven't even bothered experimenting with them because of my response to them. Now, the brassica family, everyone raves about, they're so important, and the Thiocyanates are great. Sulforaphane is an amazing thing, anti-cancer, all of that. And it's very interesting. I mean, it does have anti-cancer properties, but just like chemotherapy, it's damaging to cancer, but it's also damaging to our cells. And this whole thing of getting these hormetic stress responses in the body and the antioxidant responses. Now, the antioxidants aren't in the plants, they're in your own body, and you're just inducing a response for your body to produce those antioxidants. These plants are pro-oxidants, and that's what people don't realize. And you can choose your method of getting a glutathione response. If you do cold exposure, Wim Hof, ice bath style, cold water immersion, or you do heat, you do the heat shock proteins, so you're doing the saunas, you do exercise, which is a stress as well on the body. You can do breath retention and holding the breath, another stress. All these things will create these hormetic responses without the need of having the side effects of plants. So it is quite a fascinating perspective for me after doing this carnivore experiment and realizing that I don't need plants for good health, but also looking at all the claims that people are making around these things. And the superfood industry is $1 billion industry, and the plant industry is massive, agriculture is massive. So there's a lot of invested interest in people consuming these things and to continue consuming these things, and I think we need to question it. I'm not anti-plant, anti-anything. I'm open to everything, but I am skeptical, and I do think that we need to look further and have a clear understanding, hence why I wanted to do this experiment, to know for myself, not to just read about it. FODMAPs, so fermentable, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So those things cause gastrointestinal inflammation, bloating, feed the bacteria, so people can get small intestinal overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth, and gas. So this is one of the amazing things on the carnivore diet. I didn't fart for the whole time, so no gas, which is quite profound, and everyone just thinks it's normal to have smelly farts or whatever, and even some vegans kind of claim that I know this is part of it, but it's the human digestive tract. We've got a shorter colon for a reason, because we adapted to consuming meat, and we have large brains, and we had the gut-brain trade-off, and we've only been cooking for 500,000 years, whereas meat we've been consuming for 2.5 or 2.6 million years, which is very interesting when you think of, well, if you ever tried to have a raw tuber or tried to consume a sweet potato raw, or any of these tubers that we supposedly got lots of energy to fuel our brain with, you cannot eat those things raw. And the varieties of carrots and beetroot that we have today just weren't around. And to go through the ground and all of that, whereas animal fat, just phenomenal. So much nutrient density and energy density for our amazing brains. So this is another one, salicylates. Coconut oil is promoted as one of the healthy things for everybody, and medium chain triglycerides, all these benefits, which I think they're there, but at the same time it's very high in salicylates, and it's a preservative for the plant, and it's antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal, San Familiar, and these are the things that we're supposed to get from it, but it's also the things that it's expressing onto our digestive tract. Now, salicylates also in the safe nut, the macadamia, is a high-fat keto nut that everyone says because it doesn't have oxalates like almonds and all the other seeds that are problematic. So people go nuts on macadamias, but high-fat, but yeah, again, salicylates. So they can be problematic. Again, the soaking, sprouting, fermenting, the dehydrating, all these methods to make them more digestible, but would we have done that? And would we have done that if we had the option to kill an animal and just eat the flesh, the fat, and da-da-da? Besides, if we put the moral and the ethical components out of that, but just look at survival for the human species and for convenience and practicality, it just, you've got to question these things. Looking at fibre. Now, if you're constipated, do you want a larger stool or a smaller stool? Pretty simple, guys. Fibre is something that's so overrated, and people think, it's so necessary. Now, I did this whole period without any fibre, and no issues. Actually, much better digestion, smaller stools, because there's obviously less going in. But fibre is something people think of as something that's beneficial, and it's got all these, it feeds the microbiome, blah, blah, blah. But people don't realise that it causes fat malabsorption. Now, most people would think that's great. Well, you don't want to absorb fat, you don't want to get fat, you don't want all the negative side effects of fat. And it also binds up bile acids and fat-soluble vitamins. Now, this comes back to, if you look at what's good for the planet now, is it better for us to consume more or less? Is it better to be more efficient with what we're eating, or have malabsorption? And I think it's pretty obvious that we want to make sure that if we're going to eat something, we're going to make use of it, not just have it pass through us and fertilize the soil. I mean, that's not a bad thing for ruminants, because they can afford to chew and sit down and do that. Well, they're not sitting down, walking around and ruminating all day, but human beings, we're about efficiency. And we let the ruminants do that nutrient condensing for us. And, I had to question this. And the other benefit, people talk about fibre feeding the microbiome and then getting short-chain fatty acids. Well, if you're in a state of ketosis, you get all those short-chain fatty acids which feed the gut lining and feed the body anyway. So we do have to question that. The microbiome, this has got a picture of a cheetah. They're amazing animals. But what they did some research on cheetahs and looked at their consumption of collagen and connective tissue and how that was able to feed the microbiome to manufacture short-chain fatty acids. So I was having collagen all the way through this, having the bone broth, So, maybe that was keeping my microbiome in balance. But I think unhealthy microbiomes are a product of consuming what we can all agree on, processed, refined carbohydrates and all the garbage foods that people put in their body. Now, if you're not consuming those, you're not going to have the overgrowth of bacteria that is trying to recycle you and return you to the soil. Part of nature's process. If someone's not working with evolution, they're working against it. So nature is saying, look, back to the soil for you. Here's cancer, here's disease processes. Pretty simple perspective, but I think there's some truth to it. Now, vitamin C is something that a lot of people question about the carnivore diet. You can't get vitamin C. Well, that's not true. It's in organ meats, it's in flesh. If you overcook meat and destroy it and dry it, do whatever, that's not vitamin C. That's why fresh meat has always been a cure for scurvy, and you can look that up. That's well known, and you don't need plants to get vitamin C. And the other component of this is how much vitamin C do we need? Now, I'm sure a lot of us are aware of the different vitamin C protocols for healing people. Now, if someone's relatively healthy, how much do we need? And I think that's still up for debate as to how beneficial high-dosing vitamin C is. I think there's definitely some evidence there, and definitely we all need vitamin C. How much, I think, is debatable, and how much do we need for good health? I've maintained optimal health for the 8 months. I did this experiment for 6 months. I say that because I got my blood tested at the 6-month mark, but I don't have any issues with wounds healing or any of the things that vitamin C is important for. 12,000 years of agriculture. Now, a lot of us can look at this and think, oh, this is great, allowed us to form communities, but personally, I believe this is one of the biggest mistakes we've made and that we need to learn from. The process of making deserts with agriculture is something that we are in desperate need of reversing. And when you look at a piece of machinery like that, it still doesn't come close to the ruminant animal that grazes on perennial pastures and converts that sunlight through the plant kingdom into its flesh for us to eat. And if you look at machines like that, just raping the soil, they're pulling all the nutrients out of the soil and putting it up in the atmosphere, tilling the soil, and then using annual crops, which again just devastates our landscape and doesn't provide us with nourishing food, but it does provide profits for large agricultural and food processing companies. Now, the human being evolved to cooperate. Now, we have the whites in our eyes, which is a key distinction that we have, same as with canines and wolves, and we're pack predators. Now, what makes human beings so amazing is not that we have big teeth, claws, horns. We have this ability to stand upright and have awareness of our environment, but we have the ability to harness and utilize communities as well as tools. So we're amazing at holding objects and using them with precision. And a lot of people speculate that this is how we were able to wipe out the megafauna of the world and why we've been forced to consume plants, because of that wiping out of those larger mammals that were much easier to utilize for having communities and having health. So now we're at a point where we need regenerative agriculture. We need to harness the sunlight energy and use ruminant animals to build the soil, pull carbon out of the atmosphere, increase biodiversity, and fuel and nourish us all at the same time as healing the planet. And this is such an important time for us to get to know this and understand this. And this is the fastest method in which we can do it. And as a side effect, we get these amazing animals that have got these nutrient-dense organs, blood, bones, collagen, meat and fat. And a lot of people get squirmish about all these things, but they are the superfoods. And these animals are amazing at condensing nutrition. They're the ultimate expression of sunlight moving through the minerals and the plants, forming them. And human beings are the ultimate expression of that whole system. And each one of us has the genetics of evolution that's so underutilized. And I just want to teach people and inspire them to make use of their genetics and have optimal expression and learn how to tune their instrument daily so that way they can get more out of the life experience. So some things that I found after doing, I went and got a CAC scan done, coronary artery calcium score done, and I had a 0 score on it. Pretty cool. I got my blood work done, my C-peptide, 0.1, insulin 2, which these are very low, like a type 1 diabetic, but it's because I'm not consuming carbohydrates. My hemoglobin A1C, 5.6, my serum glucose, my fasting glucose is always low. I'm actually got a continuous glucose monitor on right now, so I always stay in between 4.5. Maximum I can get it up is to 7.1. And I did that with hot bath. Even when I've done honey testing, so a whole tablespoon of sugar just to see what it would do, I can't get it up above 6.1, and the only other time it goes up high is when I'm training, around 6.3 when I'm training. My stress hormones, 2.6 for ACTH, and cortisol, 247, so all low, so not a lot of stress in my body. The only thing that was interesting for me, I had not low, but 9.3 out of a 11 to 22 range for copper. My zinc levels were optimal, my selenium levels optimal. Homocysteine was a touch up at 9.9, which ideally I'd get that down a little bit. So I think that's part of the whole autoimmune process, but it's still not in the unhealthy range. My high sensitive C-reactive protein was non-existent, 0.1. My erythrocyte sedimentation rate also very low, 2 millimeters per hour, which is very low, so very light. My cholesterol is very high. Now, this is a very interesting thing. It's a 10. Now, my triglycerides are low, 0.8. My HDL is very high, 1.8. LDL is high. Now, there's a lot of speculation that this is very bad for us, and to me, this is misinformation. I think in the state of someone who has high fasting blood glucose and has metabolic syndrome, and this is the fireman going to the fire, which is what most of the people in this whole field say as a way to explain it. But basically, it's healthy. If you have high LDL, you're going to live longer. This has been proven in the studies, as well as looking at inflammatory responses to bacterial infection. It's antiviral, and it's supports your immune system as well as your hormonal system and every cell in your body, all the things that cholesterol is good for. Now, another thing as well is if it's oxidized, it's not good. So I had my serum lipoprotein little a done, and that's 27 nanomoles per litre. Above 72 is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So I don't have any calcium in my heart, in my arteries, and I've got low levels of oxidol. I've got non-existent levels of oxidized cholesterol. So all pretty cool, pretty safe, even though I've had 20 years of consuming a high animal fat diet. For 20 years I've been into this, and it's only this experiment I've done it without the plants at all. Yeah, very, very cool, very insightful. So I'm originofenergy.com. You can look me up on Origin of Energy on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, and reach out if you've got any questions, if you'd like to learn more. Here to help. I want to inspire as many people as I can, not to be carnivores, but to just be open-minded and to understand what the viable solutions are. Everyone's free to choose what they want to do in this life, but I think we need to be informed. So be well and enjoy this amazing experience we call life. Ciao.